The great hall of Axis Prime was cold, not because of the temperature but because of the beings who filled it. Admiral Park had learned to read alien faces over his 3 years of diplomatic service. He saw the contempt in their eyes. He saw the amusement in the way they held their bodies. They did not see him as an equal. They never had. The station floated in neutral space, far from any planet or star. It was supposed to be a place of peace, a place where species could talk without the shadow of war hanging over them. But Park knew better now. There was no peace here. There was only the slow death of hope. He sat at the long table made of some alien metal that shimmered like water. Around him sat the 12 representatives of the Galactic Covenant. They were the rulers of known space. They had controlled the galaxy for 10,000 years. Humanity had only reached the stars 300 years ago. To them, humans were children playing in the yard of giants. High Arbiter sat at the head of the table. He was tall, almost 3 meters, with a body covered in hard plates like armor. His eyes were compound like an insect, and they reflected the light in 1,000 tiny mirrors. When he spoke, his voice buzzed and clicked, and the translator turned it into words that Park could understand. "We have considered your requests," said. "We have discussed them at great length. The Covenant has reached a decision." Park leaned forward. His heart beat faster. For 3 years he had worked for this moment. 3 years of insults. 3 years of watching human ships destroyed in border incidents. 3 years of attending funerals and writing letters to families who would never see their loved ones again. All for this, all for peace. "We will grant humanity a place in the galactic community," continued. "But there are conditions." Park nodded. He had expected conditions. Every treaty had conditions. "First, humanity will surrender control of 60% of your colony worlds. These will be placed under Covenant protection." The words hit Park like a punch to the chest. 60%. That was billions of people, entire generations who had built lives on those worlds. "Second, humanity will reduce its military fleet to 100 vessels. All other ships will be destroyed under Covenant supervision." 100 ships. They currently had 12,000. It was not a navy. It was a surrender. "Third, humanity will accept civilizing oversight. Covenant advisors will be placed in your government, your schools, and your media. They will help guide your species toward proper behavior." Park felt something cold settle in his stomach. It was not fear. It was something else. Something that had been sleeping for a long time. Lieutenant sat beside him. She was young, only 28, but she had seen more death than most soldiers twice her age. Her hands were flat on the table, perfectly still, but Park could see the tension in her shoulders. "These terms are non-negotiable," added. His compound eyes glittered. "You may take time to consider them, but the Covenant's patience is not infinite. We have been generous with your species. We have tolerated your presence in our galaxy. Do not mistake our mercy for weakness." The other delegates made sounds that the translator did not bother to convert. Park knew what they were. Laughter. They were laughing at him, at humanity, at the very idea that humans could be anything other than what the Covenant decided they would be. Park thought about his daughter. She was 12 years old, living on a colony world that would be surrendered under these terms. He thought about his father, who had died fighting in one of those border incidents. He thought about the millions of humans who had worked and dreamed and built something beautiful among the stars. And he thought about what they were being asked to give up. He stood slowly. The movement was not dramatic. He simply rose from his chair like a man who had finished a meal and was ready to leave. But something in his posture made the room go quiet. "We came here in good faith," Park said. His voice was calm, too calm. "For 3 years we have come to this table. We have buried our dead. We have swallowed our pride. We have accepted insult after insult because we believed that you wanted peace." He reached up and removed the small device from behind his ear. It was his translator. Without it, He could not understand the aliens, and they could not understand him. Every species in the galaxy knew what it meant when someone removed their translator at a negotiation. It meant there was nothing left to say. Park placed the device on the table. The soft click it made echoed in the silence. "You do not want peace," he said, knowing that his words would not be translated but speaking them anyway. "You want submission. There is a difference." He turned and walked toward the door, stood and followed him without hesitation. Her footsteps matched his perfectly. Behind them made a sound of irritation. "You are making a mistake, human. Your species cannot survive without the Covenant's protection. The galaxy is dangerous. There are things in the dark between stars that you cannot imagine." Park did not turn around. He did not respond. He simply kept walking. As they reached the door, pulled out a small communication device. She typed a single phrase and sent it to Earth Command. The message was only 4 words, but it would change the course of history. "The wolves remember." The door closed behind them. In the Great Hall, the Covenant delegates exchanged glances. Some were confused, some were annoyed, none were worried. Waved one of his armored limbs dismissively. "Let them go. They will return when they realize they have no choice. Humans are emotional creatures. They need time to accept reality." The delegate from the collective, a being made of flowing liquid metal, spoke up. "Should we not pursue them? Make an example?" "There is no need," replied. "Where would they go? What would they do? They have no allies. They have no advanced technology. They are alone in a galaxy that does not want them." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "In a few months they will come crawling back, and when they do, we will add new conditions. Perhaps we will take 70% of their worlds, perhaps 80. They will learn that defiance has consequences." The delegates nodded in agreement. The meeting continued. Other matters were discussed. The human problem was already forgotten, filed away as a minor annoyance that would resolve itself. None of them noticed that something had changed. None of them felt the shift in the universe. None of them understood that they had just made the worst mistake in the history of their species. On the shuttle flying away from Axis Prime, Admiral Park sat in silence, piloted the vessel, her hands steady on the controls. "Sir," she said quietly, "what happens now?" Park looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth. Somewhere out there was his daughter. Somewhere out there were 8 billion humans who had just been told they were worth nothing. "Now," he said, "we show them what humans do when they have nothing left to lose." The shuttle flew on through the darkness, carrying 2 humans home. Behind them, the Covenant celebrated their easy victory. They had no idea what was coming. 6 months passed after Admiral Park walked out of the peace talks. The galaxy waited for humanity to break. The Covenant prepared their invasion fleet. Diplomats from other species placed bets on how long it would take for the humans to surrender. But something strange happened, something no one expected. Humanity went silent. Trade routes that had connected human space to the rest of the galaxy were abandoned. Merchant ships stopped arriving at alien stations. Communication channels went dark. It was as if an entire species had simply vanished into the black between the stars. Covenant scouts were sent to investigate. Some returned with reports of empty space stations and evacuated colonies. The humans had left, taking everything with them. Not even garbage remained. Other scouts did not return at all. High Arbiter dismissed the reports. "They are running," he told the Covenant Council. "They know they cannot fight us, so they flee deeper into their territory. When we advance, we will find them cowering on there, ready to accept whatever terms we give them." But not everyone agreed. Admiral, commander of the Covenant Vanguard fleet, studied the reports with growing unease. He had fought many species in his long career. He knew what fear looked like. This was not fear. This was something else. On Earth, President stood before the United Terran Congress. The session was closed. No recordings were permitted. What was said in that room would remain secret for decades. "They think we are weak," said. Her voice was soft but carried to every corner of the chamber. "They think we are primitives who stumbled into space by accident. They think we will roll over and show our bellies like trained animals." She paused, letting the silence grow heavy. "They are wrong." In the seats before her sat the leaders of every human nation, every colony, every station. They had come together as they had never come together before. For the first time in human history, there were no divisions, no politics, no old grudges. There was only humanity. "For 300 years we have prepared for this moment," continued. "Not because we wanted war. We never wanted war. But we knew that someday someone would look at us and see prey. Someday someone would try to take what we built." She activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air above the Congress floor. Ships, weapons, factories, things that had been hidden for generations. "Project Prometheus began 200 years ago," explained. "Every major government contributed. Every scientist, every engineer, every worker played a part. We built in secret. We hid our true capabilities. We let the galaxy see only what we wanted them to see." The images showed warships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were not the clumsy vessels that humanity had used for trade and exploration. These were predators, sleek and deadly. "The Covenant thinks we have 12,000 outdated ships," said. "They are wrong. We have 40,000 vessels, and every single one of them is built for one purpose." She did not need to say what that purpose was. Everyone in the room understood. Far from Earth, on a station hidden inside an asteroid field, Dr. Lee Minyu watched the first batch of new weapons roll off the production line. He was 60 years old, and he had spent 40 of those years working on Project Prometheus. He had always hoped his work would never be used. He had prayed that diplomacy would succeed, that the galaxy would accept humanity as equals. But now he stood in a factory that ran day and night, producing instruments of death that would make the Covenant's weapons look like toys. His colleague Han walked up beside him. She was younger, only 35, but she had been his best student and was now his best engineer. Her face showed no emotion as she watched the assembly lines. "Production is at maximum," she reported. "We will have enough for the first wave within 2 months." Minyu nodded slowly, and the special projects pulled up a tablet and showed him the data. "Phase cannons are operational. Shield penetrators are in final testing. The electronic warfare suite is ready for deployment." "What about the ground forces?" "Every colony has activated the militia protocols. We have 2 billion soldiers ready for deployment, another 5 billion in reserve." Minyu closed his eyes. 2 billion soldiers. It was a number that would have terrified any species in the galaxy. The Covenant's entire military numbered only 800 million. But numbers were only part of the equation. In the outer colonies, training camps had sprung up on every world, not just for young soldiers, but for everyone. Children as young as 10 learned basic combat tactics. Elderly citizens memorized sabotage protocols. Farmers practiced guerrilla warfare in their fields. On the colony world of Nu, a woman named O led her squad through a training exercise. She was 42 years old and had been a school teacher before the war. Now she carried a rifle and wore combat armor. Her squad consisted of her neighbors, the baker from down the street, the mechanic who fixed her car, the librarian who had recommended books to her children. They moved through the forest like ghosts, silent and deadly. 2 months ago they had been ordinary civilians. Now they were soldiers. "Remember," told them during a break, "we are not fighting because we hate them. We are fighting because we love our children. We are fighting so they can have a future." Her squad nodded. They understood. Every human understood. This was not about revenge. This was about survival. Back at Covenant headquarters, intelligence reports began to paint a troubling picture. The humans were not running. They were consolidating. They were preparing. Admiral requested an audience with High Arbiter. "We should attack now," he urged. "Before they finish whatever they are building. Every day we wait, they grow stronger." Dismissed his concerns with a wave of his armored limb. "Let them build. Let them prepare. It will make our victory more impressive. The galaxy will see that even a prepared humanity is no match for the Covenant." But the missing scouts. "Accidents, navigation errors, space is dangerous," leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering. "I have ruled this galaxy for 300 years, Admiral. I have crushed rebellions that made humanity look like insects. I know what I am doing." Wanted to argue. He wanted to show the data his analysts had compiled, the patterns in the missing ships, the strange energy readings from human space, the whispered rumors from traders who had glimpsed something in the dark. But he knew it would be useless, had already decided that humans were no threat. Nothing would change his mind until it was too late. On Earth, Admiral Park reviewed the final preparations. His fleet was ready. His soldiers were ready. An entire species was ready. He thought about and the contempt in those alien eyes. He thought about the laughter in the Great Hall. He thought about all the humans who had died because the galaxy saw them as nothing. "Sir," his aide said, "we are receiving the final confirmation from all sectors. Operation Awakening is ready to begin on your command." Park looked at the star map before him. Millions of ships were represented by tiny dots of light. Billions of soldiers waited for his order. He had never wanted this. He had spent his whole career trying to avoid this. But the choice had been taken from him by creatures who saw his species as insects to be crushed. "Send the order," he said quietly. "It is time to show the galaxy what we really are." The message went out across human space. In factories and training camps, on ships and stations, 8 billion humans received the same words. "The waiting is over. We remember who we are." The silent months had ended. The storm was about to begin. The system was supposed to be an easy target. It was a small system on the edge of human space, home to only a few million colonists. Covenant intelligence said there were no major defenses, no fleet, no weapons platforms. Admiral led the vanguard himself, 300 warships, the finest in the Covenant armada. Each one was capable of destroying a planet. Together, they could burn an entire civilization to ash. As his fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, felt a moment of satisfaction. This would be the beginning of humanity's end. After, they would move to the next system, and the next. World by world, they would crush human resistance until only Earth remained. Then his sensors officer made a strange sound. It was not words, it was fear. "Admiral," the officer said, voice shaking, "there is a ship." Looked at the main display. A single vessel floated in the center of the system. It was small, barely larger than a shuttle. It was clearly not a warship. It looked like a diplomatic courier. One ship allowed himself a small laugh. "Is this supposed to frighten us?" "Sir, they are broadcasting." "Let me hear it." The bridge speakers crackled, and then a human voice filled the air. It was calm and clear, speaking in perfect Covenant standard. "Attention, Covenant fleet. You have entered Terran space. You are ordered to leave immediately. If you do not leave within 60 seconds, you will be destroyed. This is your only warning." For a moment, no one on the bridge spoke, then started laughing. The other officers joined him. Even the sensors officer, still pale with fear, managed a nervous chuckle. "Destroyed," said, "by one courier ship. Human arrogance knows no limits." He opened a channel to his fleet. "All ships, advance. Destroy that courier and proceed to the colony." 300 warships began moving forward. Their weapons powered up, ready to vaporize the tiny human vessel. The courier did not move. It simply floated in space, waiting. 12 seconds passed. Then the universe changed. Light erupted from the asteroid belt that ringed the system. Not weapons fire, something else. Ships. Hundreds of ships appearing out of nowhere, their hulls black and their engines burning blue-white. Barely had time to register what he was seeing before the first shot hit his flagship. The impact was impossible. Covenant shields were supposed to be impenetrable. Their ships were built to withstand any weapon in the known galaxy. But this shot went through the shields like they were not there. It punched through the hull armor. It kept going until it exited the other side of the ship. Alarms screamed. The bridge filled with smoke and sparks. Officers shouted damage reports that made no sense. How could they be damaged? How could this be happening? "Return fire," roared. "All ships return fire." His fleet tried to obey, but something was wrong with their targeting systems. Their weapons locked onto each other instead of the enemy. Ships that had served together for centuries suddenly turned their guns on their allies. "Electronic warfare," his tactical officer gasped. "They have infected our systems. We are shooting ourselves." Watched in horror as two of his cruisers destroyed each other with their own missiles. Three more collided when their navigation systems went haywire. A battleship began spinning in circles, its engines firing randomly. And still the human ships kept coming. They moved like nothing had ever seen. They did not fight like the clumsy human vessels his intelligence had described. They danced through space, dodging Covenant fire with impossible precision. Their weapons fired continuously, each shot finding its target. But the worst part was not the ships. The worst part was the boarding parties. Captain led the first wave of Marines onto a Covenant destroyer. His squad wore armor that gleamed like black glass. They carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. The Covenant crew tried to fight back. They were warriors trained from birth for combat. But they had evolved on a world where the temperature never changed, where food was plentiful, where survival was easy. Humans had evolved on Earth. Earth, where the temperature could swing 50 degrees in a single day, where poison grew beside food, where the water could kill you as easily as the land, where survival meant fighting every moment of every day against a world that wanted you dead. The Covenant soldiers fired their weapons. They hit the humans, shots that would have killed any other species in the galaxy. The humans kept coming. Took a plasma blast to the chest. His armor cracked. He felt the burn spreading across his skin. Any Covenant soldier would have died. Any other species would have fallen. Raised his rifle and kept shooting. Beside him, Private Jinnah fought with a broken arm. Sergeant advanced with 3 holes in his stomach. Corporal Moon dragged herself forward with legs that no longer worked, still firing her weapon. The Covenant soldiers broke. They ran. They had never seen anything like this. They had never faced creatures that refused to die. In 30 minutes, the destroyer was taken. In 40 minutes, the second destroyer fell. By the time an hour had passed, human Marines controlled 12 Covenant vessels. Watched his fleet die around him. Of 300 ships, only a handful remained. They were surrounded. Their shields were gone. Their weapons were useless. "Admiral," his communications officer said, "the humans are broadcasting again." The same voice came through the speakers, the same calm, clear tone. "Covenant Commander, your fleet is destroyed. Surrender your remaining ships and your crews will be treated according to the laws of war. Refuse and you will join your fallen vessels. You have 30 seconds. Wanted to refuse. He wanted to fight to the last. He had never surrendered in his long career. But then he looked at his bridge crew. They were young. They had families. They had followed him into this battle because they trusted him. He closed his eyes. "All ships," he said slowly, "stand down. Power down weapons. Prepare to be boarded." The surrender went smoothly. Human Marines took control of the remaining Covenant vessels with professional efficiency. They did not torture. They did not mock. They treated their prisoners with cold respect. As was led to a holding cell, he passed Captain. The human's armor was scorched and cracked. Blood seeped from a dozen wounds, but he stood straight and his eyes were clear. Hal asked, "How did you do this?" Considered the question. "You thought because we asked for peace we could not make war. You were wrong. But your ships, your weapons. We built in secret. We hid our strength. We hoped we would never need it." His voice hardened. "You gave us no choice." Was pushed forward by his guards, but he heard final words echo behind him. "Tell your arbiter, tell your covenant, this was just the beginning." Of 300 Covenant warships, 17 escaped the system. They fled at maximum speed, carrying news that would shake the galaxy to its core. On Earth, the news arrived within hours. President addressed the planet on every screen and speaker. "Today we won our first battle," she said. "But this is not a celebration. This is a beginning. The Covenant will return with more ships, more soldiers. This war will not end quickly or easily." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was heavy with truth. "Many of us will die. Many of us will lose people we love. But we will not surrender. We will not kneel. We will fight until the galaxy understands that humanity will not be conquered." Across human space, no one celebrated. They knew what was coming. They knew the cost they would pay. But they also knew something else, something that filled them with a terrible, burning hope. They could win. For the first time, they truly believed they could win. And that made them more dangerous than any weapon ever built. High Arbiter stood before the Covenant Council in a chamber that had not seen such fear in 3,000 years. The reports from had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. 300 ships destroyed. Admiral captured. The human fleet emerging from nowhere with weapons that made Covenant technology look ancient. "This changes nothing," declared, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Was a surprise attack. Our scouts failed to detect their preparations. It will not happen again." The council members shifted nervously. They had ruled the galaxy together they had crushed rebellions and conquered empires, but none of them had ever seen anything like this. "We will mobilize the full armada," continued. 10,000 ships, the largest fleet in galactic history. We will burn human space system by system until nothing remains but ash and memory. The delegate from the collective raised a shimmering appendage. "And if the humans have more surprises, if their hidden fleet is larger than we thought?" "Impossible," said. "Our intelligence indicates." "Your intelligence indicated was undefended," the delegate interrupted. "Your intelligence has been wrong about everything." His compound eyes flickered with anger, but he controlled himself. "The Armada will launch in 1 week. This discussion is over." But even as the Covenant gathered its forces, humanity was already moving. Admiral stood on the bridge of the battleship Phoenix, flagship of the Terran Strike Force. Around him, hundreds of officers worked in quiet efficiency. They were preparing for Operation Homecoming. "All strike groups report ready," his executive officer announced. "We have confirmation from all 12 targets." Nodded slowly. He was 63 years old, a veteran of the border conflicts that the Covenant called incidents. He had buried too many friends. He had written too many letters to families who would never see their loved ones again. Now it was time for the galaxy to understand what that felt like. "Launch the operation," he said. Across the galaxy, human ships appeared in Covenant space. They did not come as invaders seeking conquest. They came as messengers bringing truth. Strike Group 1 hit the shipyards, where the Covenant built its warships. In 2 hours, 3 centuries of construction burned to nothing. Strike Group 2 destroyed the supply depot at Prime. 1,000,000 tons of fuel and ammunition vanished in a fireball visible from the planet's surface. Strike Group 3 cut the primary communication lines between the Covenant core worlds. For the first time in history, the 12 member species could not talk to each other. And so it went across 12 systems, 12 perfect strikes. Human ships appeared, accomplished their missions, and vanished before the Covenant could respond. But the physical destruction was only part of the plan. On every screen in Covenant space, a broadcast began to play. It started with footage that the Covenant had tried to suppress for decades. Human colony worlds burning, human refugees dying in their ships, human children crying for parents who would never return. Then came the peace talks. Every meeting was shown, every insult, every demand, every time the Covenant delegates had laughed at human suffering. President's voice narrated the footage. For 3 years we begged for peace. We offered everything we had. We accepted conditions that no species should accept. And what did we receive in return? The footage shifted. Covenant soldiers executing human prisoners. Covenant officials dividing human colony worlds among themselves like prizes. High Arbiter saying, "Humans are animals. We will train them or destroy them." They called us animals, said. They burned our homes, they killed our families, and they told us to be grateful for their mercy. The broadcast paused, and then new footage began. Not human suffering this time, but Covenant crimes. Mass graves on occupied worlds. Species that had been wiped out for refusing to submit. Slave camps where beings worked until they died. The Covenant has ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, continued. In that time, they have destroyed 47 species. They have enslaved hundreds of billions of sentient beings. They have built their empire on blood and bones and broken dreams. Her voice hardened. We did not start this war. We never wanted this war. But now that it has begun, we will not stop until the Covenant answers for its crimes. We will not negotiate. We will not show mercy. You taught us what mercy earns. The broadcast ended with a simple message in every language spoken in Covenant space. We are humanity. We remember. The effect was immediate and devastating. On the Covenant, riots broke out as citizens demanded to know the truth about their government's actions. On occupied worlds, resistance movements that had been silent for centuries suddenly found new courage. The Collective announced it was reconsidering its membership in the Covenant. The Federation, its ships from the combined fleet, even species that had been loyal began to ask questions that had no safe answers. High Arbiter watched his empire begin to crack, and for the first time in his long life he felt fear. How did they get that footage? He demanded of his intelligence chief. How did they know about the camps, the executions? The intelligence chief had no answers. He only had more bad news. Sir, we are receiving reports of uprisings on 17 occupied worlds. The human broadcast seems to have inspired. I know what it inspired, snapped. Find out how they did this. Find out how they are always one step ahead of us. But the answer to that question was simple, if had been willing to see it. Humanity had been watching. Humanity had been learning. For 300 years, they had smiled and nodded and acted like primitive newcomers while secretly studying every aspect of Covenant society. They knew the trade routes. They knew the political divisions. They knew which species hated each other and which alliances were based on fear rather than loyalty. They knew everything. And now they were using that knowledge to tear the Covenant apart from within. Dr. Lee Minyu watched the reports come in from his station deep in human space. Each victory brought him no joy. Each successful strike only reminded him of what they had lost. We are winning, Han said, standing beside him. Are we, Minyu replied, or are we just losing more slowly? She looked at him with concern. The Covenant is breaking apart. Their fleet is in chaos. Their allies are abandoning them. And how many humans died today? How many families will never be whole again? Minyu shook his head. Every weapon I built, every ship I designed, they were all meant to protect us. But protection and destruction are the same thing, just pointed in different directions. Was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My brother died he was on the Phoenix when she took a direct hit. 17 crew members died in that section." Minu closed his eyes. "I am sorry." "Do not be sorry, he knew what he was fighting for." She straightened her shoulders. "We all do. We are fighting so our children do not have to. We are fighting so humanity has a future." On the front lines, that future was being written in fire and blood. Captain led a ground assault on a Covenant supply world. His unit had been fighting for 18 hours straight. They had taken casualties. They had lost friends. But they had not stopped. As they secured the final objective, paused to look at the soldiers around him. They were tired. They were wounded, but their eyes still burned with determination. Corporal Moon, who had lost the use of her legs now walked on mechanical replacements. She fought harder than anyone. Sergeant, who should have died from his wounds, had refused to stay in the hospital. He said he would rest when the war was over. Private Jinnah, the youngest in the unit, had become its most experienced soldier. She had killed more enemies than anyone could count. They were not soldiers by choice. They were teachers and farmers and engineers who had picked up weapons because their families needed them. And they were winning. Admiral Park received the reports on Earth. Operation Homecoming had exceeded all expectations. The Covenant was reeling. Their alliance was fracturing. Their military was in disarray. But Park knew the war was not over. Still had 10,000 ships. The Covenant could still destroy humanity if their forces. The next phase would be the hardest. They would have to push into Covenant space itself. They would have to bring the war to worlds that had never known conflict. "Sir," his aide said, "President is requesting a status update." Park looked at the star map one last time. So many lights, so many worlds, so many lives hanging in the balance. "Tell her we are ready," he said. "Tell her the Covenant is learning what we already knew." "What is that, sir?" Park smiled grimly. "That the most dangerous creature in the universe is not a predator. It is prey that has decided to stop running." 1 year after the war began, it ended. Not with a dramatic final battle, not with fleets clashing in the fire of dying suns. It ended quietly, in a room much like the one where it had started. Admiral Park returned to Axis Prime. The station looked the same as it had when he walked out, but everything had changed. The Great Hall was emptier now. Only 5 of the original 12 Covenant species had sent representatives. The others had withdrawn from the Alliance, their governments collapsed or replaced. High Arbiter was not there. 3 months earlier, his own people had removed him from power. The being who had ruled the galaxy for 300 years now sat in a prison cell, waiting to answer for his crimes. The new representative of the Covenant was young by galactic standards. Her name was, and she belonged to a species that had always been quiet in council meetings, content to let speak for them. Now she carried the burden of an empire in ruins. Park sat across from her. He did not feel triumphant. He felt tired. A year of war had aged him a decade. He had seen too much death. He had made too many difficult choices. "Before we begin," said, her voice soft and musical, "I want to apologize, not as a diplomat, not as a representative of the Covenant, as a person." Park was surprised. He had expected demands, arguments, attempts to salvage what remained of Covenant power. Not this. "We were wrong," continued. "We looked at your species and saw what we wanted to see. We saw primitives. We saw animals to be tamed or destroyed. We never looked closely enough to see the truth." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the early days of the Covenant, before we became an empire, before we decided we had the right to rule others. She said we were different then. We were curious. We were humble. We wanted to learn from other species, not control them." Looked down at her hands. Somewhere along the way, we forgot. We became so powerful that we stopped seeing other beings as equals. We stopped listening. We stopped caring. Park sat in silence, letting her speak. When your people walked out of this room, we laughed. We thought it was funny. A species barely 3 centuries old, defying an empire 10,000 years in the making. Her eyes met his. We did not understand what we were seeing. What were you seeing? Park asked. Dignity, said. Something we had lost so long ago that we did not recognize it anymore. The negotiations took 3 days. Humanity's terms were harsh but fair. The Covenant would withdraw from all human space. They would pay reparations for the lives lost during the years of conflict. They would release all information about the species they had destroyed so that their memories could be honored. But humanity did not demand the destruction of the Covenant. They did not seek to rule over their former enemies. They did not take revenge. Why? Asked on the final day. After everything we did to you, why do you not destroy us? Park thought about his answer for a long time. Because we remember what you forgot, he said finally. We remember that power is not the same as right. We remember that strength means protecting the weak, not crushing them. We remember that being able to destroy someone does not mean you should. He leaned forward. For 3 years we begged you for peace. You gave us war. Now we could give you the same. We could burn your worlds. We could scatter your species. We could make you feel what we felt. His voice softened. But if we did that, we would become you. And that is a price we are not willing to pay. The treaty was signed. The war was over. 50 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways that no one had predicted. The old covenant dissolved completely. In its place rose a new galactic council, built on principles that humanity had insisted upon: equality, mutual respect, the right of every species to determine its own future. Humanity led this new order, but they did not rule it. They served as mediators, peacemakers, bridge builders between species that had been enemies for. On Earth, the scars of war slowly healed. Cities that had prepared for siege became centers of interstellar commerce. Factories that had built weapons now produced ships for exploration and trade. Children grew up knowing that the stars were full of friends, not enemies. Dr. Lee Minyu, now 95 years old, gave a lecture at the Interstellar Academy. The audience was filled with students from a dozen species. Young beings who had never known the war, who had grown up in a galaxy at peace. A young alien, barely old enough to be away from her, raised a manipulator appendage. Dr. Lee, do humans regret the war? Minyu considered the question. He thought about Han, who had died in the final offensive, saving the lives of 300 of her colleagues. He thought about Captain and Corporal Moon and Sergeant, friends who had become family in the fire of battle. He thought about his wife, who had waited for him through those terrible years, never knowing if each goodbye would be the last. Every day, he said, we regret it every single day, every life lost, every family broken, every child who grew up without a parent. We carry that weight and we will carry it until we die. The young alien seemed confused. Then why did you fight? Why not surrender? Minyu smiled sadly. Because some things are worth fighting for: our freedom, our dignity, the right to exist without asking permission from those who see us as lesser. He looked out the window at the stars. Once those stars had seemed cold and hostile. Now they were full of promise. We did not fight because we wanted to, he continued. We fought because we had no choice. When someone tells you that you are nothing, that you deserve nothing, that your existence is only permitted at their pleasure, you can accept it or you can refuse. We refused. He turned back to his audience. And if we had to do it again, we would. Not because we love war. We hate war more than any species in the galaxy. We have seen what it costs, but we love our children more. We love our future more. And we were willing to sacrifice everything to give them a chance. The lecture ended. The students filed out, talking among themselves in a dozen languages. The galaxy they lived in had been shaped by decisions made before they were born, by people they would never meet. Minyu sat alone in the empty hall. He was old now, too old for lectures really, but he kept giving them because he believed young people needed to hear the truth from those who had lived it. The door opened, and a familiar figure walked in. Admiral Park, now retired, still moved with the careful precision of a military man, though his hair had gone completely white. "Good lecture," Park said, settling into a seat beside his old friend. "Good audience," Minyu replied. "They ask better questions than we did at their age. They grew up in a better galaxy." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two old men watching the stars. "Do you ever wonder," Minyu said finally, "what would have happened if the Covenant had accepted our peace offer, if it seen us as equals instead of prey?" Park nodded slowly. "Sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I wonder about all the people who would still be alive, all the suffering that could have been avoided. And then I remember that we did not choose this path. They did. We offered them our hand and they slapped it away. We showed them our best intentions and they laughed." Park looked at his friend. "We cannot change the past, Minyu. We can only make sure the future is different, and I think we have done that." Outside the window, a ship rose from the spaceport. It was crewed by beings from 6 different species, heading out to explore a region of space that had never been mapped. They flew under a flag that showed a blue marble floating in darkness, Earth, the of a species that had refused to die. Minyu watched it go. "You know," he said, "when I was young, I thought the worst thing that could happen to humanity was war. I thought violence would destroy everything we had built. And now I understand that the worst thing is not war. The worst thing is giving up, accepting that you are nothing, letting others define who you are." He turned to Park with something like hope in his old eyes. "We did not give up. We never gave up. And because of that, our children will never have to face what we faced. They will grow up in a galaxy that respects them, that sees them as equals." Park nodded. "That is all we ever wanted." The two old soldiers sat together as the ship disappeared into the stars. Behind them, the Interstellar Academy hummed with the voices of young beings learning to build a better future. The war was over, the galaxy was at peace, and humanity had finally found its place among the stars, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as equals, as friends, as survivors. The story of their struggle would be told for 10,000 years, passed down from generation to generation, species to species. And always at the center of that story would be a simple truth. When the universe pushed humanity to its knees, humanity stood up. And the universe learned to respect them.